My guess is that Donald Trump would win. Ukraine failing, losing to Russia, would be just like Afghanistan for him. And he doesn't want to be in that position. His own military will tell him it's not going to achieve anything, and he can't afford to give an order that his own military doesn't follow. I don't see a way that you have a permanent peace in Europe, let alone Ukraine, but a permanent peace in Europe unless Ukraine is a part of NATO. Winning breeds winning. So once things start to go well, they get better.
Kurt, good to see you here in Ukraine and in Odessa. You are definitely not first time here.
No, it's my fourth trip as I count to Odessa. My first trip was probably my favorite because we had a U.S. destroyer in the port of Odessa, which was a great thing. I wish we had that there again now.
And I'm definitely sure that it's not the last time, and we will see a lot of U.S. ships here in Odessa.
I think that is the future. Once Ukraine is a member of NATO, I think that'll become a normal thing. And I also think that we still need to be talking about freedom of navigation in the Black Sea. We've got to talk about demining in the Black Sea. And these are things that individual NATO countries can help with, and these are things that NATO as a whole could help with. You may know that Bulgaria, Romania, and Turkey have formed a trilateral arrangement to conduct demining in the Black Sea. And I think this can be the kernel of something that grows into more of a multinational presence.
And that drives me to the next question, or one of the most important, is about NATO. You have definitely heard a statement which have surprised a lot people in Ukraine, a statement of President Joe Biden that, victory of Ukraine does not mean NATO membership, and he did not see NATO membership as such. Have you perceived it like that?
He said that, but again, none of us know what he was thinking exactly. But I think what he was thinking was the Washington Summit in July. I think he's thinking no NATO invitation now. But it has been U.S. policy for 16 years. It was U.S. policy at the Vilnius Summit, and it'll be repeated again at the Washington Summit, that Ukraine will become a member of NATO, but not now. That there's, when there's agreement of all the allies, when it meets conditions, etc. So a commitment that it will be a member of NATO. And as you know as well, we just did this bilateral security arrangement, signed a bilateral security agreement with Ukraine.
Signed by Joe Biden.
Signed by Joe Biden, which includes a lot of positive references to eventual NATO membership.
People in Ukraine have started to be skeptical. If the US is doubting whether Ukraine would be a NATO member, without the US, it is just impossible. How do you see? How could it happen that Biden did this statement?
I can't answer that. I can't answer that. I mean, it must have been in his mind, and he was probably thinking about the Washington Summit. The reason I bring that up is because almost all of the allies, leave aside Germany, the US, and Hungary, all of the other allies support an invitation for Ukraine to join NATO at the Washington Summit. It'd be an invitation to start accession talks. This is what was in the Rasmussen-Yermak working group paper, which I was a part of, recommending this approach for NATO. But the US is not in favor of that right now. The Biden administration is not, nor is Germany. And of course, Hungary is a special case. We don't have to go into that. But he was probably thinking about the pressure that they're under now. But in my view, and again, this is just me, I'm a private citizen, I'm not representing the US government, but I don't see a way that you have a permanent peace in Europe, let alone Ukraine, but a permanent peace in Europe unless Ukraine is a part of NATO. We have to have clear lines. We have to have an absence of gray zones where Putin is tempted to start a war. We have to bring Ukraine into NATO as part of the strategy for restoring peace in Europe.
So we can be sure that the US policy in general would be pro-NATO, pro-Ukrainian NATO.
Yes, that is US policy. Despite what the president may have said, he was probably thinking something else.
Do you expect that the next president of the United States that would be elected this year would have a different name?
It's hard to say. It's 5 months away. The polls are very close. If you were to take the election today, my guess is that Donald Trump would win. He's leading in the polls, and particularly in the swing states, but it's a long time from now, so we don't know. And also, I wouldn't make any assumptions about what policy will be. President Biden in the second term, he might decide, okay, now is the time. President Trump might say that, okay, if we're going to end the war, part of ending the war is bringing Ukraine into NATO so we don't have to go through this again. And I think you can sell NATO membership as burden sharing as well. That right now the U.S. is providing half or more of the security assistance for Ukraine and the most critical elements of security assistance. It would be something I think Trump would like to see European allies picking up more of that load, and that's something you can do through NATO.
Let's talk more in detail about possible Trump's leadership in the U.S. What do we expect?
Yeah, the secret to dealing with a potential Trump presidency is don't expect anything. Do your own homework, be prepared, be proactive, but don't make any assumptions and don't leap to any conclusions, because I don't think anyone knows for sure what he would do.
Even Trump himself.
Even Trump himself.
Anyway, now his team is starting to be kind of shaped.
I don't think so. He will have to pick a vice presidential candidate, and the convention is now about 1 month away, so he'll be picking a vice presidential candidate. But I wouldn't make any assumptions about who's going to be Secretary of State, who's going to be National Security Advisor, who's going to be Secretary of Defense. We simply don't know.
But do you see that Trump is progressing in his understanding of Ukraine?
I think in a couple ways, yes. I think one of the key things that Trump would have learned in the last few years is that he was right not to pull out of Afghanistan, because it was an absolute disaster. And he wanted to. He really wanted to get out of Afghanistan. He kept telling people, get us out of there. But in the end, he never did, because he was told it's going to be a catastrophe. And it was. So I think now he would see that Ukraine failing, losing to Russia, would be just like Afghanistan for him. And he doesn't want to be in that position. I think he also, in Trump's mind, looks at the way the Biden administration has handled things and says, well, as he says, this wouldn't have happened if I was in charge. But he views this as a weakness, and so he wants to project strength. But the most telling thing is that when we needed to get passage of the supplemental assistance for Ukraine through the Congress, he gave very strong political cover to the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, to get it done. He had him visit in Mar-a-Lago. They did a press conference together. He tweeted. He spoke out publicly a few days later. And then when Marjorie Taylor Greene, a very far-right member of the Congress, filed a motion to remove Speaker Johnson from his position, it was Trump who came out and said, give it a rest, Marjorie. Don't do this. So he clearly was protecting Johnson and Johnson's ability to get the aid through. My guess is that he knew that if he didn't do that, he would be inheriting a disaster at the time he becomes president, if he gets elected. And he didn't want that.
I completely agree with you. And I feel that it is not the only reason for him. I think that, correct me if I'm wrong, that currently he is trying to talk to different people that he used to talk through last years. And he started to listen and to hear some things about Ukraine.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I would not go that far. I think the thing I would say about Donald Trump is he knows his own mind and he makes his own decisions, and they can go anywhere. I don't think people can claim to speak for him.
You correctly say that we should not guess anything about Donald Trump, but let's try to guess one thing. Would the US leave as a NATO ally?
No, I don't think so. And I think it's important to look at what happened again earlier this year. He was at a campaign rally. He was bragging about how he got European NATO allies to spend more on defense. So he said he threatened them by, if they hadn't spent enough on defense, then he'd tell Putin to do whatever the hell he wanted. Well, obviously there was a big reaction against that statement in Europe. Allies didn't like hearing that. It was the main topic at the Munich Security Conference. So a few weeks later, he orchestrates a conversation with Nigel Farage on stage where they flip it around. And Nigel Farage asks him, so if a country had spent 2% of GDP on defense and was treating the US fairly, would you come to that country's defense? And he said, of course, 100%. So he was taking what he said as a negative before and flipping it around to become a positive, but still with the focus on getting NATO countries to spend more. And that, I think, is his main issue with NATO, is he feels that the US has been taken advantage of, and we've spent too much and others have spent too little. So he's trying to shift that balance.
Now we have another person who is very difficult to guess what this person would do. It's Vladimir Putin, of course.
I don't think Putin is that hard to figure out. Putin wants to rebuild the Russian Empire and deny the right of people around Russia to have their own countries. He believes that everybody should be under Russia. It's a very Hitlerian worldview. And he's very clear about it, he's written about it, he talks about it, and he acts on it. So I'm not surprised by anything that Putin is doing. Now, what he does, though, he's tactically very clever. So he tries to sow divisions within Europe, sow divisions within NATO, undermine democracies, push narratives that are false, and convince people that maybe he's reasonable, and if you just don't provoke him and maybe negotiate something, there's a solution.
Is he successful in that?
Look at Viktor Orban, a person and a country that was occupied by the Soviet Union, that in 1956 had for 10 days or so recaptured its freedom, and Soviets come in and squash it. And Orban in 1989 was the one who called for the Soviet Union to move its troops out, and now he is espousing a pro-Russian view. It's incredible what Putin's been able to achieve.
From you, it's always not about Putin's success, but about Orban's tactics. So I think that it plays for Orban too. It's not like he's becoming Putin's Muppet.
Some things work for Orban. Being the defender of Hungarian national identity and traditional values, that works very well, for understandable reasons. And we see a lot of our own politicians defending traditional values and identities in our own countries. That works. But the Hungarian people are not pro-Russian. And him adopting a pro-Russian view is very confusing to people. Similarly, the Hungarian people are very wary of China. They see it as first off, far away, racially different, culturally different, linguistically different, and potentially undermining Hungary's economy. So people are very wary of China as well. And yet Putin has said he's China's best friend in Europe. So I don't think these things play well. I think the nationalism, the identity, the traditional values, that works. But even playing against Brussels and playing against Washington, that works.
Now we see another attempt by Putin to play this game, to try to undermine Europe by threatening it. We have heard new statements by a Russian leader. He says that to start peace talks, NATO should deprive Ukraine of any future in the alliance, and then Ukraine should take off its forces from so-called Novorossiya, from occupied regions and even not occupied regions. What is the reason for that? I think that it's clear that Ukraine would never do that.
Of course, but it is to try to sow divisions where some people might think, well, that at least is an opening. He's talking about peace. We should explore this. We should have dialogue. You can just hear in Western European capitals the wheels turning that, maybe we should find a way to talk to Putin. Maybe we could end this war. And so he does that to create divisions within Europe, between Europe and the United States, between Ukraine and its European and American allies. He's trying to drive these wedges.
But NATO allies would not agree?
No chance. No chance anyone will agree to that.
What is the reason then? So he would not make a division because aside of maybe Hungary, and even with Hungary, it's not so clear, no one would agree.
Right. But people might start thinking, well, he's ready to talk. He's ready to negotiate. We should start a negotiation, some track 2 dialogue or 1.5. It's just trying to create confusion and create division.
In late 2021 and early 2022, when Putin also threatened, and finally he has attacked. He has, well, not attacked, but escalated, because he has already
was attacking, yeah.
Don't you expect that now he's preparing for another escalation?
I think if he could escalate, he would already have done so. He has a lot of problems militarily, personnel, equipment, ammunition, so forth, leadership, command and control, morale. Also morale in the domestic population, because they don't really want their kids to go fight in Ukraine.
Some do.
Some do, but you know, the trend is the opposite direction. You know, they didn't empty out their prisons because they couldn't, because they had plenty of other recruits. They did it because they needed more. So I think that he's got more problems than they publicly admit, and I think that he can't really escalate conventionally very much right now.
Only with nukes.
Yeah, and so nuclear is different because there's always the possibility of using a tactical nuclear weapon. The problem there is that I think his own military will tell him it's not going to achieve anything, and it will bring a retaliation against Russia. So better not to do it. And he can't afford to give an order that his own military doesn't follow. So I don't think he can really escalate. So in 21, you're absolutely right. He gave an ultimatum to NATO in order to justify his invasion, in his mind. I don't think that's the case now. I think this is more about the diplomatic effort of a peace conference and how to disrupt that and how to continue to create doubts in Europe and between Europe and the US about how to handle things.
To end up, let's talk shortly about difficult topic of way for Ukraine to achieve victory. Do you see that way?
Oh, yes, of course. But let's start with the US and NATO allies. We have to conclude that our objective is for Ukraine to win, and therefore we will develop a strategy with you for how to do this. That is not happening right now. We are making incremental decisions about how to help Ukraine, help you survive, give you this ammunition, give you that weapon system, say you can use it in this area around Kharkiv, but maybe not anywhere else in Russia. It's very incremental, and it is minimizing rather than maximizing.
And to my view, and not only to my view, it's widely spread in Ukraine a vision that probably it's tactics not to allow Ukraine to lose, but to control that Ukraine never wins.
It's fear. It's fear. It's not so much controlling that Ukraine never wins. I think people would be happy and relieved if Ukraine won. But there's fear, as you pointed out, fear of escalation, other countries, other borders, fear of nuclear weapons, fear of Russia falling apart as a country, fear of loose nukes inside Russia if that happens. So just all of these apprehensions about, oh, we have to be careful. And that policy guided by fear is the opposite of a policy guided by purpose. The purpose should be Ukraine has to defeat Putin and Putinism in Ukraine. Defeat those forces, and whatever it takes to do that, including firing inside Russia, military targets, tightening sanctions against the Russian economy, providing Ukraine the weapons that it needs, lifting all restrictions, as I said, helping with freedom of navigation, strengthening the Black Sea security, maybe providing direct support for air defense so that Ukraine can move its own air defenses forward where they're needed, helping Ukraine with, especially with its energy sector as we head into this winter so that there is no risk of power outages. Those are all things we could and should be doing.
But that is the substance of my previous question. What is the way to win? Because I don't see a will, and I don't see a way to get that will on the West, especially in the US.
Yeah, I think we just have to keep fighting for it. You're right, I don't see it at the moment, but it doesn't mean we can't get there. Macron, for example, I think he has moved from his position a year and a half ago to today. He's moved substantially in this direction. The UK has always been in that position. Poland, Lithuania, other Baltic states, all Czech Republic.
Trump, Biden?
We don't know about Trump, as we talked about earlier. Anything is possible. And with Biden in the second term, it's possible.
So let's hope that it will happen. And I'm definitely sure that when Ukraine will be starting to win, we will see it again and check whether everything is correct.
We will. And one thing that I think we should pay attention to is winning breeds winning. So once things start to go well, they get better. That creates a bit of a momentum of positive belief, willingness to do more. That in turn creates better conditions, which makes things go better. So we have to get onto that virtuous cycle. Right now, we're not there. We're in the stagnation cycle. But when things start to go better, they will go better faster.
That's absolutely correct. And I believe it will happen better sooner than later.
Let's hope.